In this fundamentals video with digitizing with stitch and sew, we'll talk about the use of a fill stitch and how to create one with the digitizing tools of the program. In this example, you're going to see this image, which you can import as a practice image from the images folder in your Stitch and Sew 2 directory. This is called Balloon. We brought it in by going to create an import image, and you've got a small collection of images to practice from, as if you were digitizing a real logo. So we've used Balloon, clicked OK to bring it in, and then we've created the design on top of that. And what you're looking at, and we'll hide the image here by pressing the L button, is that you have, for the balloon, three separate sections which you can see down here in the object list. There's the large section here, and then the two smaller sections down here to make that look like a balloon. And they were done in three sections to give this the 3D effect that you have in the main section, and then kind of the ridge of a tied off neck of a balloon. And the two lower sections were done in what's called a satin stitch. And notice in the simulated view that the lower sections look like they're raised up above the a little bit higher than the main field of the balloon. The two lower sections are called satin stitches, and the satin stitches are generated by having the needle penetration points only on the side, by going like this, left and right, or back and forth on each side with needle penetration points only on the side. That lets the thread sit up a little bit more on the fabric and giving it its raised look that you can see in the simulation. And so that these two are satin stitches. However, satin stitches are only appropriate up to a certain length, which is about 1/4 of an inch. Anything longer than that, you need what's called a fill stitch. So this area here is larger than 1/4 of an inch, and you can tell from the inch ruler here that this is about 1.5 inches wide, so anything over 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch cannot be done in the satin stitch down here. It should be done in a fill stitch, otherwise the stitches will be too long. So this video shows how to, once you've made a decision, how to make that decision, to choose either a fill or satin stitch, and then on doing so, how to create that fill stitch. So let's start from scratch. We'll create a new design, and then we'll import that same image. And the way that you decide whether it should be a fill or a satin stitch is go to Tools and set Grid Size. And if you're working in inches up here, then set your grid to 0.04 by 0.04 inches. That's approximately 1 millimeter. And you can choose between inch and millimeter in the upper left corner here, so that you are working in inches, which is a more comfortable measurement unit for most people. And then go ahead and turn on your grid once you set it to 0.04 by 0.04 by going to View, Show and Hide Grid, and you have your small grid squares. So your grid, the 1 millimeter is the primary measuring unit, an easy measuring unit to tell when you've gone too wide for a satin stitch. For example, glancing at the neck of the balloon here, the two sections which we chose to digitize separately to give it two separate raised sections, are each no more than about, crosswise, about 3 millimeters wide for this one, tapering down to about 2. This one's about the same thing, about 2 millimeters wide, flaring up here to about 4, then about 2.5 down to about 2. So neither of these sections is wider than about 6 unless you run them across this way. In which case this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is definitely a little bit too long as a satin, but to run it this way, this works. However, this is not the case at all with the main area of the balloon. For the purposes of this discussion, we will ignore these two highlights and address them in a later video. Pretending that they're not there, this oval is definitely much more than that 6 to 8 millimeter maximum of width that you can do a continuous stitch, or which would be called a satin stitch. Instead, digitizers choose, once you're above 6 to 8 grid blocks wide, to go back and forth to do it as a fill stitch. So that's your primary uh, your primary way to tell which one that you need to choose. Again, when you properly set up your grid, all you have to do is show your grid and just glance at any of the artwork, and by looking at the grid blocks, you can tell at just almost a glance if you're over, how much you're over that 6 to 8 millimeter maximum width for satin stitching. Now that we know that we have to apply that, let's show how to create that. So you should have a digitizing level of Stitch and Sew, either Studio or Studio Plus, which enables you to use the digitizing tools. So click on that, and we're going to use the Freeform tool to create this. And when you use the Freeform tool, you have different ways to fill or to apply stitches to whatever shape that you do. Use the default normal fill, which means that if you create a closed shape in, it will fill in that closed shape with stitching in a fill stitch. So click on Freeform, and we'll go ahead and hide our grid to make things a little bit easier. And you can start anywhere on this shape and just continue clockwise or counterclockwise, it doesn't matter. And the other thing we're going to do is, we recommend for any digitizing, is go to Tools and System Parameters, and under the Embroidery tab, check Enable Editing of Curves during the creation of new objects. That's going to make life a lot easier for you as you draw or even rough out your shapes. So we'll start at the top, for lack of a better place, and just start clicking around. I set my first point, and then just go a little bit further along the shape and place the second point. You'll notice that if we hide the image here, you can see that it's automatically connected those two clicks with a line. But if I place a third point along the shape, notice what it does to that straight line. It now curves that shape, and we'll hide the image so you can see that. It's automatically curved it because the program recognizes that the 3 points you laid out are not in a straight line, so it does a best fit curve to save you from having to curve that yourself. So continue around placing shape points. And I'll hide the image again just so you can see how that looks. And you'll notice that sometimes we're not placing it very well, even though I've had quite a bit of practice with this program. Sometimes I'm not going to place my points exactly, but the program is designed that you can adjust the curve on the fly. To do this, move your cursor near the curve and see the little plus next to it, and as the cursor arrives over that curve, you'll notice it changes to a curve shape, which means that it's detected that you're over it, and then when you click at that point, it allows you to adjust and move, which is very, very easy to do. And notice that we're doing that without having to leave the Freeform tool. We can edit on the fly. So we've cleaned up our curve, and then as we get to the last point here, do not follow your instincts to try and set the last point on top of the original point. Leave it a little bit open like this. We'll press the L button to highlight the shape that we're doing, and to close the curve, press the 0 key. So press 0 and see how those two ends join. Now we're ready to digitize or fill this in with stitching. To do so, press the Stitch It button here, or right click and choose Enter, and follow the prompts at the bottom of the program. Now it tells you to input the direction. For example, this is setting the angle of the fill. If you want the stitches to run horizontally, click and drag, and you'll notice that a blue line follows your cursor. If you want it to run at an angle, then just drag that second point to wherever that to whatever angle you need be. You can make this line as short or as long as possible. It doesn't matter, as long as you draw that line to the angle that you want it to set. I'm just going to guess about a 45-degree angle here like this, and I'm going to let go, and watch what I let go at the bottom left corner of the program, what happens. I've let go, and now it asks to input the entry point. So it's a good idea to print the entry point, which is the first point of the stitch group, maybe opposite from where it's going to end. So since we probably wanted to fill down and then sew the neck at the bottom of the balloon, we'll start here at the upper left, since the rows are going to kind of flow down this way. And now that we've clicked, you see that little arrowhead, which shows that you've instructed the program when it fills this in to put the first stitch there. Now it asks you to put the exit point after you've selected where you want to put the end point or put the starting point. So I'm going to put it at the bottom since we want to exit out the bottom and immediately sew the neck. And when I do that, it'll automatically fill in with stitches in whatever color that we have here. I'm going to press the letter L to bring the image back up. And there's a neat trick for that, is that you can click on the color swatch up here, and we'll move this off of the balloon, and you'll notice that your cursor becomes a magic wand, which you can then hover over the artwork. And notice as we hover over the artwork, the sampled color appears here, and it's basically detecting what you're going to click on. And now you can see when we click that the new color is selected, and I hit OK. This becomes the color of the color swatch. Therefore, as you're drawing and digitizing, you can create stitches simulated in the color of your actual artwork, so you can see how it's turning out as you do it. So we're now ready to place the endpoint, and on doing so, you'll see that's filled in the purple stitch, or in purple stitching the same color as the balloon. And to see it in simulation, go to View and go to Realistic View, or Alt-R, and you can see that pattern that's created by the fill stitch.